For me, it's a very beautiful film that touches on so many themes: silent film, deafness. I mean, the sound design is extraordinary. Could you talk a little bit about the sort of interplay between those three elements as well?
Mm-hmm. Well, interestingly enough, it was Sandy Powell, my costume designer, who I've worked with for years and years now, who got to know Brian Selznick after working together on Hugo, the Scorsese's beautiful film. And I think Sandy read a draft of one of your adaptations of the script, right?
She read the book.
She read the
original book.
So that's what made her say, I've been saying it wrong.
Yeah, there was nothing, just the book.
And so based on that, she said she thought maybe this was something for me. And at first Brian was like, say what?
I've been a fan of Todd's for a long time.
But didn't necessarily think this was maybe my audience or subject matter. Whatever the case.
Todd's children's movies are some of my favorites.
And so, but when I read Brian's adaptation, which is what I read before I read the original book, it had already been moved by him into an embrace of the cinematic languages that you describe. And in such a way, because it's a film that's not reliant on dialogue. So it really means that all of the most elemental parts of our medium, the editing, the music, the performances by kids who are, and people who are not driven by dialogue, but by gesture and by looks and by faces, and all of those elements really make the film work and move it forward as a narrative. I also felt that I just wanted to do something really special for younger audiences. I feel like they have the capability, sophistication for something like this. But yeah, it was a real adventure in what film can do at its most basic the language of film. And so I put around me some of my very favorite creative collaborators, the production designer Mark Friedberg, of course Sandy Powell, Afonso Gonçalves, my editor, and Carter Burwell, the composer. And we talked about the score and the way so much of the film would be conveyed without dialogue, and music would be such an important part of it. But we I realized that while the sort of concept of pairing the two stories kept reinstating the sort of mystery that the film really is, every time you cut from black and white to color, the question is restated: why are these two stories sharing one film, and how do the destinies of these two characters link up? It meant that the music and all of these things needed to touch both parts of that and make it a single organism as a experience.
And for you, Brian, this is, we know you well as a writer and an illustrator, and this is your first screenplay. What was it like for you, sort of delving into this new domain?
It was fascinating because I've always loved movies, and I've grown up watching movies, and I've been a fan of Todd since Poison came out in '91. And I never thought of myself as working in the world of the cinema, of movies. And I became friends, besides becoming friends with Sandy Powell on Hugo, I also became friends with John Logan, who had done the beautiful adaptation for The Invention of Hugo Cabret. And John sort of took me under his wing and told me what a screenwriting program to download, and said that he would give me notes and feedback, and it was sort of like having a masterclass in what makes a screenplay. But John said, don't show this to anyone while you're working on it. Just because it's an unusual structure, it's an unusual story, don't let anybody tell you what they think it should be. Make it what you think it is. And it's actually very close to the original book. The structure is the same, weaving back and forth between the two stories. The biggest challenge was figuring out how to make something that was meant only to be a book into something that feels like it was meant only to be a movie. And I saw what John Logan did with Hugo, where he took a book that was meant to celebrate film, but ultimately be about the importance of books, and he made it into a movie that is about a celebration of books and writing and reading and bookstores, but is ultimately about the importance of cinema. And that's why I think that worked as a movie. And so I thought, in the original book of Wonderstruck, Rose's story is told entirely in drawings, so that the visual experience of looking at her story would parallel how she, as a deaf person, experiences the world. Because if you're deaf, most of the way you experience the world is through what you see. Your language is visual. So I thought that would work really well with pictures. And then Ben's story, aren't these guys amazing?
It's all in writing.
These guys are amazing. And I made them up. And and here they are, like
Thank you
real.
for making me.
It's so weird. And so for Ben's story, it's told all with language, with written language. So we're inside his head in a way that's different than our experience with Rose. And the two stories interact. So when it was time to write the screenplay, I had to figure out how to take that, because that can only work in a book. So that's when I thought, if I tell one story in black and white and silence, like a movie from the 20s, we'll think that it's silent because that's how movies were made at the time, but we'll come to realize that it's actually because it's how the character experiences the world, because she's deaf. And then the other story can be told like a movie made in the 70s. I actually sort of imagined it as Robert Altman's McCabe and Mrs. Miller turns into Mean Streets for children. And that's what got us here.
Oaks, congratulations on an extraordinary performance. I'm sure this audience loved it as much as I did when I saw it in Cannes. Can you tell us a little bit about how you prepared for this role? Because you're playing a character who, you know, very, very quickly in the line of the story becomes deaf and experiences the world in a way that might be different to your own. So can you give us a little bit of a sense of how you prepared for that?
Todd was amazing through the preparation process for this. And really, we just talked about Ben being deaf and Ben becoming deaf and Ben being hearing, and the change he has to go through in the film. And when we met with a couple of deaf people, and we also took a very fun walk around New York City with silent headphones, so that we could experience that and see how New York City was with no sound, which just feeling that absolute amazement really carried over to how I acted. And Ben, when he opens up the door of Port Authority and comes out into New York City for the first time, and that's pretty much it. I mean, that's how it worked, and Todd was just absolutely brilliant in helping me with that.
Great. And Jaden, can I ask you about how you came to the film and what it was like for you working with Todd?
So I did a couple auditions. I did 3 auditions before the chemistry test before meeting young Oaks here. And
The chemistry was good.
apparently. For me, preparation was, I previously done a TV show with Baz Luhrmann, which was based in the same time frame. Of course, it's not a children's movie or anything, but I carried over a little bit of that information. And for me, I always like listening to music that I think correlates with that kind of time period, or if it's not era, with that character, because for me, music defines who I am, and for my characters, music would define who they are. So that's what I do. But yeah, I auditioned, and then I got the role, surprisingly, and I started working with Todd, and we had a lot of fun. I don't know if Todd can talk about that, but I had a lot of fun with Todd. We really got to be ourselves in the character. If we wanted to try something, Todd would totally be cool with us just trying something else, trying something different. And if we didn't like it, we would throw it in the trash. But if we did like it, we would try it again. And that's really important and, not something that you get out of most directors. So it was a lot of fun.
We have time for a couple of questions in the audience. I'm not sure if we can get the house lights up a little bit. It's quite hard to see into the audience. Are there questions out there?
I see one.
There's one up the back there and one down here. And
microphone is being passed.
okay, one there and one up here. Is there? Yeah. Okay. Here first. Thank you.
Hi, I love the film, so thank you so much for it. I think you all did an amazing job. This is a question for Todd. I was just wondering if you had any particular silent films that you used as a reference for the silent parts of the film, because I saw lots of sunrise, metropolis in the cityscapes, and I was just wondering if you could talk a bit about that. Thank you.
Yeah, this was an invitation to look back and really pay homage to silent cinema at the sort of apex of silent cinema before sound came into the scene, and Murnau is sort of where you start in many ways as a director, at least for me. And Sunrise is a film I knew and loved. I'd never seen. There are a couple films that I discovered in the course of researching the film that just completely floored me, and one of them is The Last Laugh by Murnau. A film that doesn't even rely on intertitles. It's done completely with images. And then a film that I'd always heard about that's actually very hard to get your hands on, which is The Crowd, King Vidor's The Crowd from 1928, which is shot in New York City, on the streets of New York City. It sort of balances amazing naturalistic performances with spectacular set pieces. A famous shot that we may all know, or many of us have seen before, is quoted by Billy Wilder in the apartment in the scene that finds him in the grid of desks, alienated in his work life in this sort of Kafkaesque environment. And it is lifted verbatim with great love and affection from King Vidor's film, and we in turn quote it in the miniature section at the end of Wonderstruck when Ben is hearing Rose's story, and we loom over all the grid of desks as she's working in the Museum of Natural History with all these strange creatures on all the desks. But it was really, what one learns about that period is that every brand of narrative, every stylistic instinct was established in the 20s. And that if anything, we may never have surpassed the sophistication, the artistry of the silent era. And in some ways, I almost thought working with kids at this age, this amazing age of around 12, before puberty comes into our heads and changes us forever, that there's a level of, we're just starting right here, there's a level of wisdom and insight and experience that is so divine and so deep, that if these guys were running the world, I think we'd be in far better shape than we are right now. And so it was a real privilege so it was almost like a parallel, like the sophistication of this age was like the sophistication of the silent era before sound came in and screwed everything up.
So we'll take the question up here and then down to here.
Thank you very much for this absolutely amazing sound and vision experience. Why David Bowie's Space Oddity?
Where are you?
Wave.
Oh, hi.
Well, this is for all music lovers around here. So why did you pick David Bowie's Space Oddity?
This was in the book,
yeah.
And this was in the script.
Yes.
I defer to my writer.
I've always loved David Bowie. I've always loved that song Space Oddity. And there was something about imagining what that song means and the idea of that person lost and trapped in outer space and having this connection to ground control. And there's a strangeness about that song that just felt right. And I was aware that most of the child readers of Wonderstruck might not know the song, I assumed most of the older and adult readers would, but it's the sort of thing where even saying the name Space Oddity, quoting some of the lyrics in the book, which I did, gets across a little bit of what David Bowie is doing in the world of that song. And so when I was writing the screenplay, one of the pieces of advice I got from John Logan was never put song cues into a script, because the director's always going to disagree with you, and there's people whose job it is to pick music, and the rights are always difficult. And there were two song cues that I put into the script, which I felt were really important. One was from the book, which is Space Oddity, and the other, which I just said to John Logan, I said, I've got to put this in. Like if Todd decides not to use it, if we can't get the rights, that's fine. But if you guys have seen the Peter Sellers, Hal Ashby film Being There, there's an extraordinary sequence where Peter Sellers' character, Chance the gardener, leaves a house for the first time that he's never left in his life. And it's like an old Victorian house, and you can't tell what time period the story takes place in, really, but he opens the door into 1970s Washington, D.C. And as he's leaving the house, it's the music from 2001, A Space Odyssey, also Sprach Zarathustra, except done as a disco version. And when we first see Rose in 1977 as a grown-up, and she's walking down the street, I thought that has got to be also Sprach Zarathustra in disco, 2001, quoting Being There, and amazingly, we were able to put both songs into the movie. And you like the song, right?
Oh my gosh, yeah.
Yeah. Oh. It's that one. And so it was so exciting to see how it was then used in translation. And of course, Todd has a history with Velvet Goldmine and David Bowie and the world of all of that, and Oscar Wilde, and so there were all of these elements that ended up, I think, really speaking to Todd in a way that thrilled me.
Great. We are going to have one last question, and we have another house to come in soon, so we'll go to you.
My question is for Todd. I really love your films. I think you pay beautiful homage to, for example, Douglas Sirk. Have you done it before? I'm just wondering. It's pretty similar to the first question, but what's the inspiration behind Lillian? Julian's more first character. Is it I just saw similarities to Lillian Gish and The Wind. I thought there was a scene that's just incredible. It's just Lillian Gish. So I was wondering that and Photoplay magazine, what's your inspiration? Is it Joan Crawford or the stars of the era?
Well, absolutely. Lillian Gish was a kind of subtext for the Lillian Mayhew character, particularly in this role, this performance of Daughter of the Storm. And I had never seen Victor Strostrom's film either until I did research for Wonderstruck. And that is we actually had to shoot this scene in pre-production. I mean, the challenging thing, the thing that was so amazing about these kids is that because of the limited hours that the union controls on hours with kids on a film shoot, we had to shoot some of the 1970s. These kids work for 8 or 9 hours a day, and that's it. And we have a 12 to 14 hour shooting day that we had to fill out to make our schedule. And so this production was extremely complicated. We had to shoot some of the 70s and some of the 20s every single day. So I relied on the maturity, the preparedness, the sophistication of these guys. And I just have to say, before we finish tonight, the most amazing discovery that I probably have ever made in my career is in that of Millicent Simmons, who was a kid who never acted before, a deaf child from outside Salt Lake City, Utah. And I was just really committed to casting an actual deaf kid in the film. We also cast deaf actors in the silent portion of the film is supporting players, as they often did in the silent era, deaf actors impersonating us. So the production was surrounded by translators and signing and deaf actors with a lot of experience in deaf theater. But Millie, who is an amazing person, first and foremost, is someone who understands the camera uncannily. These guys have had some experience behind the camera and seen themselves and seen what it's like, but she never had. And she understands how to calibrate a performance for the lens of a camera in a way that completely floored, I think, all of us who hung out with her, worked with her, saw her perform. And Julianne Moore, who I've worked with through my whole career, was just utterly blown away by the depth of this kid and what she does intuitively, innately. So we miss her. She's actually shooting another film in a lead role in New York City, and that's why she's not here with us tonight. But Millie, we love you so much, and the film owes so much to you.
Wonderful. So I have a little spy who told me before coming into the screening tonight that it's somebody's birthday. Am I right, Jaden? So I think we need to do a very fast but rapid and beautiful round of happy birthday to Jaden. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Jaden.
Only the millionth time today. Happy birthday to you.
Ladies and gentlemen, the team from Wonderstruck.
Thanks, you guys.